Thanks, Ashwin. A great discussion. Hi, Rinki. Pleasure to sort of have an interaction with you. Let's begin with hearing your story. You are CISO par excellence. What's been the journey? What has been the motivation, and how has the sort of roadmap been for you?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. And hello, everyone. So I started my career in cybersecurity almost 2 decades ago. I graduated during the dot-com bust, and the roles the opportunities out there were just so slim. And I happened to stumble upon an opportunity at a utility company that was called an information protection analyst. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, and information security at the time was not as well known. But little did I know that that was going to end up becoming my career path back then. I'm currently the Chief Information Security Officer at Twitter. Like I said, prior to Twitter, I've worked at companies like Walmart.com, Pacific Gas and Electric, Intuit, eBay, Palo Alto Networks, IBM, Rubrik, and now just a year ago, during the midst of COVID, I took on a new role as the Chief Information Security Officer at Twitter. I joined Twitter right behind the security breach and right before the US election. So rescued them out of the breach, prepared them for the election, and here we are. And it's crazy to even say this out loud that it's been 1 year now as CISO at Twitter. So I made it. And prior to this, I was the CISO at Rubrik, which was my first entrance into the cybersecurity, the officer role.
Thanks, Rinki. Great journey. You started from the dot-com bust, trying to see what information protection was. Was the name CISO there at that time? Or how did you think the CISO's journey? They weren't even calling them CISOs then, right?
No, you're spot on. At the time, right? It was banks might have had a security officer, a chief information security officer role or title. But we didn't have one where I worked. We just had a security manager, I think was the highest level role at the time. And it wasn't well known. In fact, I think the first CISO in a tech company was at eBay, and I went to work for him actually after years after my first role. But it was an unknown word outside of banking. And so now every company that's public pretty much has a CISO. Even startup companies are starting to look pretty early on in their journey, knowing that that gives them a competitive advantage to have a robust security program. So when I started my career, I didn't even ever think that I'd go beyond a manager if that was even going to happen. So it was just an unknown field at the time.
Sure. I mean, right from a CISO designation, this last 18 months have been tremendous for a CISO. You mentioned you really helped bail out the company and you transformed them. How has the last 18 months transformed the life of a CISO?
First of all, thinking about the last 18 months in the virtual world that we live in. When I think about coming to Twitter and taking on that challenge, I don't even think I realized when I accepted the role at Twitter, it was kind of one of these things that's like, oh, this is really cool. And to work for a cool company like Twitter, I can't wait. And then when I got there, I kind of finally understood more externally the reach outs that started happening, that just kind of the gravity of being the CISO at Twitter. And in the last 18 months, a lot of things have changed. Everybody's gone remote. And when you're switching roles and taking on, especially a new CISO role, but even in an existing CISO role, a lot of what we do is dependent on influence, right? Influencing other people, getting security to be the top initiative at the company, ensuring folks understand why it's important so that they can help in the shared responsibility. And being remote makes it so much harder to build relationships, to hold people accountable, to influence. And so massive change for the CISO, I think. In some ways, it made things easier too, when it comes to things like incident response or collaboration in different regions, that everyone started getting a fair footing, regardless of your location or time zones. But in terms of leading a new company, making that switch during COVID, it was the most difficult thing I've had to do in my career, to build a team, build trust, build loyalty, be able to influence without ever having met any individual in person. I still haven't met my boss in person. I haven't met many of my peers in person. So just massive change for CISOs. And I think security, just given the news during COVID too, and all the breaches and things we've heard of in the industry, security's just become everybody's talking about it. So I think CISOs have that in their back pocket right now.
I like the part CISOs have it in the back pocket right now. Yeah. Okay. You mentioned something very important, that it's life of influence. Who really influenced you? Who was your role model in your last 20 years? That boss or that person. Sometimes we learn the best lessons from the toughest bosses. But who are the one or two people, and what have you learned from those people, saying, this advice from this boss, this person holds me steady today?
Yeah, I would say there's two paths to influence. One is like, I think my family played a big part in influencing like the type of leader and who I am. My dad played a huge role model in my life, career, just seeing kind of how he adapted to change and how he changed over time. And I think adapting to change is such an important thing in life and career and everything. The more you can adapt and lead through change, I think is just so important. And the way I saw my dad do that in life kind of carried with me. And so that's been a huge one. For me, the biggest role model at work came with the CISO that at eBay that I worked for. And the way he invested in junior talent and young talent and innovation was unreal. He himself was an older man and he was close to retirement. In fact, he retired after that role, but he knew how to detect talent and then really put a rocket on their back and see them rise. And I think that to me was so important and something I've carried to today, which is the reminder constantly that yes, we need experienced folks in security, but we have to invest in younger talent and in innovation. And so he was a huge role model for me. And kind of, I hope I'm doing him justice in how I'm leading too.
I'm sure you are, seeing junior talent and then putting a rocket on the back, that's nice. And I love you look up to your dad and how he must have changed. How will all of this change, in the way going forward? Will the role of CISO remain static? The CISO's role itself has been transformed. They've been trying to get a seat at the table. They have good years. The media has put a good part of that. Friends like Rahul have really, epitomized the CISO career. How do you see the role of CISO changing in the next decade?
It's constantly changing. What I see is the best part of being a CISO now is the role has elevated and the importance of it is more than ever. I mean, I personally can share with everybody that I just took on a board role of a private company that I just accepted, right, for a company called Boardroom. You never saw CISOs on boards before. You saw them in advisory positions for startup companies, but seeing CISOs now come into the board role just kind of says how important that position is starting to become, because before you see CMOs and CFOs and CEOs and salespeople on board positions. So that's one aspect of it in terms of the role continuing to morph and kind of what kind of executive others are seeing a CISO become. But even in companies, right, before CISO used to be reporting to the head of IT or the CIO, or CISO used to report to engineering. That's changing. CISOs are now, you're seeing more and more reporting to CEOs, to CFOs, to legal departments, to give them independence, to have them structured in a way where it's truly a strategic advantage for the entire company. And so it's completely morphing and changing, and understanding that CISOs need to have some level of technical capability and knowledge to be able to drive influence and to bring the right data to the discussion, but also has to be super business savvy as well. Otherwise, you can't have influence if you don't understand what's important to the business. So I think we're going to continue to see it elevate, which we've seen, right? We started with, I didn't even know what a CISO was. Then CISO titles started coming. And now we're starting to see that CISOs are required almost at every company. And we're going to continue to see that role elevate.
And how do you believe a CISO should keep himself updated? You're right. You said should be super technical, have a business knowledge, almost like a superwoman, right? I mean, the pressures of the job, and I want to Superman, so clearly a superwoman like you, how would you keep yourself updated? And how would you ensure you are at the crest of the curve at the leading edge?
Yeah, where I learn the most is from my peers and I learn a lot on Twitter. So I actually use our platform to get a lot of security knowledge, stay up to date on articles. There's so many feeds and things that you can follow, and you just get inundated with information, and it's hard. It's so hard, and I'll be the last to say that I'm able to keep up with the demands and like just the news. But I think my peers in industry are something I rely on in getting important news really fast. And I definitely leverage the Twitter platform and follow folks. I hope folks follow me and probably get information from me. And that's where I kind of stay up to date on the latest and the greatest, not just in terms of news, but also like, what are security people thinking about right now? What's most important to them? In fact, over COVID, one of the things I realized was security people out of any other like industry that I saw were really suffering from a mental health issues, right? And I didn't know that unless I was on the platform kind of observing what was going on. So that's kind of how I stay up to date on all the crazy that's going on. But it's hard. It's really hard. It's just there's so much information and so many things happening in the industry.
So who are the top 3 guys whom you follow and who think you like really sort of look at following now on Twitter or LinkedIn or anywhere else?
Well, it's funny because the top folks I follow are probably all news channels. So I do follow like TechCrunch. I follow our CEO, Jack Dorsey. From a security perspective, gosh, there's like way too many to name. But I follow Michelle Obama. I follow I have so many. You can go and it's public and you can see who are the folks I follow. I would say the top 3 topics I love to follow. I love following people that inspire me. That I get inspiration from. That can sometimes be a leader. Sometimes it can be somebody that's brand new on Twitter, that's a student that says something or does something that just inspires you. I like to follow people that I learn from, that just new topics or that are posting interesting things. And lastly, like folks that are just compassionate and empathetic human beings. I think they're like really good to follow. And again, that's because I get to learn from all 3 areas.
Sure. And how do you ensure that you give back to the community?
One of the most important things to me is mentorship and sponsorship. Had I not, in my second role, I had somebody that I worked with. And it was I worked at Walmart, and it was a Walmart.com, and it was a 2-person security team with a manager. And one of my peers and that manager decided for whatever reason to take me under their wings and teach me everything there was to know around security. There was no benefit to them at all. They just kind of like wanted to teach me. And I learned so much. And it not been for that role, I probably still wouldn't be in cybersecurity, and I wouldn't be a good security engineer at heart. So they taught me everything. And ever since then, I promised myself that I will give back and continue to do the same for others. And I hope there's plenty that can vouch for me out there, that I continue to mentor folks. I will usually respond to every single LinkedIn message I get from anybody that says, hey, I want mentorship. I'd like to connect. I'd like to learn from you. And so I continue to do that. I am very involved alongside my daughter at an organization called One Prosper that's helping girls in the Thar Desert to learn English that don't have access to school. And so they help the girls and the women in the family set up an irrigation system that helps them then become self-sustainable, grow crops and things like that. And then gives the girls a bike and school essentials, and then partners them with someone in the US to teach them English. And so I'm very passionate about these things. I think it's so important for us to give back and lift others as we rise.
Amazing. Mentoring people, you probably, as you said, you respond to every single LinkedIn message. I'm sure after this, you'll have many more messages, and rightfully so. And love the idea about you having, sort of supporting the women in the Thar Desert with the English part. You mentioned security engineer at heart. If you weren't in security, if not cyber, what else would that be? If not cyber, what else?
I think, well, so when I was going off to college, I wanted to become a lawyer. That was my desire. But my dad told me that that's a second degree. He was a typical Indian dad. And he was like, that's the second degree. Your first degree needs to be an engineer or doctor. So you choose which one you want to do first. And so I chose the engineering path because I was very good at math. But I think like there's a part of me that loves law, and I love a good debate. And I know that's not what being a lawyer is all about, but I might have been a lawyer. And if not, if I continued engineering and I didn't fall into cybersecurity, I'd probably be a developer.
Okay. Good. Developers love a good debate. People also speak that a CISO's role has got its prominence, and it's gone a board seat. But going forward, we have this debate. The chief privacy officer role is getting even more better ground. Do you think CISOs will eventually merge with the CPO function, or the CPO function will take over a CISO, or a logical progression for a CISO could be a CPO function, or will they both eventually become something else? How does that position of a privacy and security merge somewhere?
Yeah, I think they're quite separate, to be honest with you. So like at Twitter, we have a chief privacy officer and then me. And the chief privacy officer, from what I've seen most of the time, are lawyers. And they're really like interpreting policies, figuring out how that will impact a company, and then taking that back. And so it's a very close partnership, but it's a little bit different. The one that's interesting that's emerging is a new function called privacy engineering. And I'm seeing more and more companies build out a function called privacy engineering. And I think there's a lot of intersection between privacy engineering and information security. And that's where you see also data management or data governance coming into play and merging in. I think in the future, especially for large companies that do have these robust, distinct functions, and this has already started to happen in some companies, but you start seeing this chief trust officer or chief risk officer, where CISO, chief privacy engineering, data governance, even IT sometimes all falls into that one function, although they are distinct, different functions within that. So I don't see it necessarily one reporting to the other. I see them continuing to be peer level teams, but because of the regulatory requirements in every country and every state, and like what we're seeing across the board, I think privacy is starting to get like that rocket that security had about a decade ago.
All right. So we all are proud of the stuff which you do at. But what's one thing in your life you've really been proud of the achievement professionally, where you think, wow, man, this stands out to my career, and I can talk about this for a long time, passionately?
Oh, it still gives me goosebumps. And so thank you for asking that question. When I was at Palo Alto Networks, and it was an amazing role. I led security operations for Palo Alto Networks, and it was a very customer-facing role, as well as protecting the company internally. But customers wanted to come and see, how is one of the best companies, cybersecurity companies in the world, running security? We want to learn from that. And so we got to connect with tons of customers daily on that. And I always felt like, man, because we're a cybersecurity company, why don't we leverage the platform to do something big and great for the world, in whatever we can. So while I was at Palo Alto Networks, we drove the first partnership with the Girl Scouts, which I think in India and other countries, there's maybe Girl Guides is the equivalent, but the Girl Scouts is the equivalent in the US. And we drove the first partnership with them to get the first set of cybersecurity badges for girls from kindergarten to 12th grade in every single zip code in the US. And so it was all the curriculum build out, finding people that can teach these girls cybersecurity so that they can earn badges, and getting that available to areas where there isn't cybersecurity expertise, there isn't even a good education system, and making that available across the United States. I think that was one of my biggest achievements. I now hear, that was, gosh, a long time ago. And now I hear that there's actual girls that took the cybersecurity badge program, earned the badges, went to school, and are now cybersecurity engineers. And that is just like, to me, like, that's why I do this job, is I hope that there's more girls, more women, more kids in general entering the cybersecurity space.
I'm sure. The program you started from kindergarten. Today, many of them will be CISOs looking up to you saying, Rinki Sethi really helped me transform, and I owe a lot to her. So, Rinki, I can get the passion with which you've done that, and you've done great service. women in cyber is a great thing, and we really want to see more of that. While you're really passionate about what you've done, and that's great, often it's failures in life which teach us a lesson which makes us go on. And I asked Rahul one question. Rahul, what's the one thing you really want to take from this conference and this discussion? His thing was, what drives a CISO, when day in and day out they face problems, they face attacks, sometimes data gets exfiltrated out, you face ransomware, you help companies go through so much trouble, you have a heavy shoulder, you take all the load of the company. And how does a person like you, Rinki, so what's your best failure lesson which you come out from?
Yeah, there's so many. If you don't fail, you don't learn. And if you don't learn, then that's a problem. So there's so many failures. I mean, I could talk about in my career that have led me up to this point, and I continue to make mistakes, right? I mean, all of us do. We continue to learn from them and become better. I can think of a couple. So one was earlier in my career. I remember I was going to roll out a phishing testing program this is when I was at eBay, and I did my homework around it. We were one of the first tech companies that was going to roll out phishing testing. Banks had done it before, right? And there was a cool startup that was kind of working on doing phishing testing at scale. And so I told our HR folks, our legal folks, that I'm going to run this simulation. I got approvals. And then I ran a pilot on a very small group of individuals in the InfoSec team. And about half an hour after sending the phishing test email, I got a phone call from a very senior leader in the HR department that said, if you ever do anything like that again, you're going to be fired. Like, do not do this. This is against our company values. We say we believe that people are good and they generally do the right things, and you're testing that. And it was because somebody was having a bad day. They clicked on the phishing link in that pilot group and reported it up to HR. And my big lesson coming out of, first of all, I was like super scared. When am I going to lose my job now? What's going to happen? And what I learned from that mistake, though, luckily wasn't fired. I was kept there, and we did roll it out successfully at some point. But what I learned from that was communication is so important in the CISO role. So important. Being able to communicate, teach people, make sure that folks are brought along in what you're doing is super critical. And you have to identify all the stakeholders that might be impacted by anything that you're rolling out. And if you don't get that right, that means you've taken some uncalculated risks, which is not smart. You want to continue to take calculated risks. And so you need to bring along people and make sure they're helping you make calculated risks decisions in a meaningful way. And so I learned that really early on in my career. Thank goodness, because I think that's one of the things that has made me successful is like ability to communicate well with others, and knowing that's so important. And you see CISOs fail when they don't do that well. So that's one mistake, but there's been, so many. Oh, you're muted, Burgess.
Anything else you'd like to share with us, other CISOs can learn from? You better learn from somebody else's mistakes than make the same one yourself. So is there any one thing you'd like to say? Okay, I made a lovely lesson. You said, take people along the phishing lesson. If you don't learn, you aren't sort of growing. And if you're not growing, it's a problem. Is there anything else you would like to impart to the fellow CISOs that don't make that other mistake like that besides communications?
Yeah, I think it's like, the other thing is that, a lot of times CISOs, like even me, I get bogged down in, we have a lot of risks to fix. And so we get bogged down in, man, we have like this backlog of risks. Let's start tackling them out. And what you realize, and I realized this in an earlier role, is that when you start doing that, there's a whole list of new risks that have emerged and new technologies that have been implemented, new innovation that has been happening in the company. And you're now still tackling the risks from maybe even some stuff that was like put on the shelf. So I think the important thing is continuing to innovate, right? So although you have a backlog of risks and you're carrying that on your shoulders, what makes you feel a little bit better is when then you are also in parallel focusing on the innovation and how you need to be plugged into the future, so that the backlog of risks doesn't continue to just exponentially grow. And I think many of us get bogged down because you do want to tackle those risks and see those die down. Board expects that of us. You need to continue reporting on that, but you have to fight for the innovation side as well, and continuing to bring in new companies that are doing really great things in the security startup space and making sure you're plugged in into the future of where the business is headed to like marry the two of those together.
Really important, the new innovation, and don't get bogged down with previous risks. Speaking of a new innovation, disruptive technologies, how do they affect the CISO, and how does CISO really catch up with them? As you're right, you have a backlog of risks. Just trying to manage them is such a tough task. And you have new stuff of IoTs and blockchain and AI and ML. And how does the CISO really take care of all these new technologies and empower the company to use them, yet the unknowns are still there?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, we're inundated, right, with security vendors that are doing the next new thing and the next new shiny buzzword. But there's some really great startups out there. And I actually carve out a good percentage of my time to spend time with those companies, more because, sometimes it's an idea that's interesting, or it's a team of people in that security company that I find fascinating and just really good people. And I invest in the team to help me solve the problems that I have. And so I think it's important for CISOs to be plugged into some of the new ways of thinking about security problems and solving them, in addition to some of the big vendors that exist. But you don't want to just become this person that's like going and talking to every startup without understanding your problems. I think understanding your risk profile and what risks you do need to solve for, as well as kind of where the business is headed and what kind of things might help them. Where you don't want to be is where the business is starting to do new things and you're giving legacy solutions to solve those problems. You want to be able to say, hey, there's a new way of doing things. This will actually help an engineering team with their velocity because this product will automate some piece of security so they don't have to worry about it. I think those are the types of things you want to be plugged into, such that you're not continuing to, again, bring up that risk portfolio or just adding tools for the sake of adding them.
Clearly don't want to give business, legacy solutions to new age problems, especially in the disruptive technologies. Life is good in cyber. You're sort of doing great. What is life outside cyber?
Life outside cyber is, for me, 2 kids. I have a 13-year-old girl and a 9-year-old boy. So I spend a lot of time with them and watching them grow. I love to exercise. I love to travel, which COVID has right now taken away from us. I wish I was there in person with all of you doing this. I love going back to India, and so I wish this was in person, but that to me is like family, exercise, travel, having a good time with friends. That's kind of my life outside of cybersecurity.
That's great. I'm just going to catch up and I have summarized some of the things you mentioned. I'm going to repeat that. Tell me, how does it sound? You want to add something to that? You started saying information protection role. Even the CISO name wasn't out there. Your journey through Walmart, Intel, eBay, privacy. How you think, wait for the company, how you rescue Twitter out. Lots of work in dependencies, influence, the power of influence. You said whole relationships, most difficult to do so in the current role. You mentioned the CISOs have to, now they have sort of tamed to a large extent the COVID, and they have in the back pocket. How your dad played a big influence, but most importantly, how your former boss at eBay invested in junior staff. He saw junior staff and then, as you said, put a rocket on the back. And best part of the CISO was how he ensured he kept them educated and kept them informed. From there, you actually sort of spoke about the CISO's the reporting, how it's changed, how it's transformed, how they have to be a business function, learn from peers, how you sort of, mentor every people, give back. You probably mentioned that you, you respond back to every person who writes to you for leadership advice, how you follow people who inspire you, how you're a security engineer at heart, but if not a CISO, you wouldn't mind being either a developer or a good lawyer. You also mentioned that you sponsor the Thar Desert Women of learning sort of English and giving it back. Finally, we discussed about the privacy engineering was a security future of cyber, the chief trust officer. What are you really proud of? You mentioned about the program where you trained people from kindergarten to senior college, and many of them have become good CISOs and look up to you. And we said failure is important in life, and a lovely example where if you don't communicate well in time, don't take people with you, you may end up sort of destroying a bridge before even building it. The fishing example, And the second more example, which is important to learn from other people's mistakes, is if you don't innovate, if you give legacy solutions to a new edge problem, you could be ending up much more in trouble. And life is all not so work and cyber, but you have a great family, you exercise, you look so much to taking care of your children. So God bless, and I'm sure you'll have a great time. We look forward to having more CISOs like you who inspire people, whom people want to be like you, and I'm sure Rahul's program will encourage that, and good luck to you and all the best. All the best, Rinki. I really enjoyed having our chat and discussion. I'm sure you're really a source of inspiration to many people in India and abroad the world, and we'll keep on looking up to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me again.